Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother asarimhotep with the Maweeja Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture, as well as the Martin Delaney Institute or Center for Egyptology. Today is Thursday, October the 7th, 2021, and we have with us a very, very special guest, the host of the blog and YouTube channel, Sister Felicity Kazadi, if I'm saying that correctly. She will correct me on my pronunciation when we bring her on. But she has a very good and interesting channel about Congo culture, Congo history, and even some basic Congo lessons. And so we're going to get into a little bit of her history and some information about the Congo when we return in just a moment. Welcome, welcome. Once again, you have made it to the Mbongi, and we're hitting you up on a Thursday today. Normally, we do our shows on the weekend, but as you know, we have dynamic guests from all across the world, and so we must accommodate the schedule according to our guest. And so we have again a very, very special guest with us today. And before I bring her on, I have a few announcements. But before I do that, I just want to shout out and let everyone know that there is nothing but love and appreciation for all of you who are catching the broadcast live, and then those, of course, of you who are catching the archives. And so, as normal, uh, recently we had a very special guest with us, and we discussed his latest text. And so, for those of you who have been following the channel, y'all know that I started a publishing company. And so, one of the first texts to be published uh, with this organization is the text by Dr. Chilemalema Mukinge out of the Congo, um, from the Baluba people in Central Africa. And the text is called Muntu wa Nzambi, Portrait of Human as God's Special Creation. And so y'all can catch that interview uh, that we did on the channel just last week. And actually, we will be on the Hoppy channel together next Friday, the 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States. And so, speaking of Hoppy, of course, I want to inform y'all that the Hoppy team who created the documentary film by the same name and their subsidiary, the Aket Tours, is having a tour. We will be going to Egypt in 2022, February the 18th to be exact. And there will be a very special conference at the on the tour, one of the latter days of the tour. And the invited and special guest that will be speaking on the conference is Professor James Smalls, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Brother Anthony T. Browder, Dr. Solange Ashby, who's an Egyptologist, a nubiologist, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, of course, our great master psychologist, Dr. Wade Nobles, your brother asarimhotep with his photo in the corner, and brother Infodishi Jehuti Times. And so it's going to be a very, very powerful event. And if y'all can make it, I would encourage you all to do so. And of course, you can pick up Dr. Mukinge's book at maduandelapress.com, or you can go to Amazon or Barnes and Nobles and the like. And if you like the t-shirt, in which I have on right here, the Kimoyo t-shirt, or the Buy and Collate t-shirt, make sure that you go to the Spreadshirt links at the bottom in the description and support and purchase one of those items. And so, with that, and without further ado, I want to introduce our guest. Again, Sister Felicity Kazadi out of Congo, who is actually joining us from Australia. And so they're about 14 hours ahead of us. So it's Friday. She's in the future. So she has come back from the future to have a discussion with us about Congo. And make sure that y'all check out her YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe and visit her website at Congo Talks 243.com, and maybe we can get an answer for what does the 243 mean. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Sister Felicity. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm actually surprised that you said that I'm from the future. I always use that. I flaunt that. I'm like, hey guys, I'm in the future.
Indeed,
So yeah,
indeed.
thanks for having me.
Welcome, welcome.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I mentioned this to you before that we had a recent guest, uh, Dr. Atkins from Ghana, who
Mm.
actually lives in Japan. So y'all kind of right there,
In the same time
neck and neck
zone.
in time. And
Yeah, yeah.
so we love to have our African guests from the future come back and tell us what's good. Unless it's bad news, like the Terminators are coming, then we could just prepare uh, for all
No
out
worries.
war.
Yeah.
But welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank
Uh,
you.
since this is your first time on our program,
Mm.
can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, um, and where you're from, and how did you end up all the way in Australia?
Mm. Hi, everybody. My name is Felicity Kazadi. I am from Congo, DRC, and right now I live in Australia. How I ended up here is actually a very boring story. It was just my dad's job that moved him on this side of the world in the Pacific. So he just decided that it's a good idea that a family moves on this side of the world. So that's how I ended up here. I've been living here for the past at least 7 years, I think. So yeah. Mm,
Appreciate it, appreciate it. So
yeah,
yeah, that's how I be. I'm a military. My family's military, so well, of course, everywhere they moved and they were stationed, we had to go to. I
definitely.
just ended
Yeah.
up where we ended up. So I do understand
Exactly.
the
Exactly.
story.
Yeah. Mm.
And so, at what age
Mm.
did you move? And
I
how was
mhm.
what age did you move? And how was the culture shock, if any,
Mm.
leaving Congo
Mm.
to go to Australia?
I moved out of Congo in 2010, in
Hmm.
2010. And at that time I was 15.
Hmm.
And the first country that we visited, I remember in the Pacific region, was the Solomon Islands. That's where we lived when we
Hmm.
moved in the Pacific for the first time. And it's a black country, so it wasn't the culture wasn't very shocking. There were like little changes here and there, but I
Hmm.
had some of the first biggest culture shocks when I moved here in Australia, and
Yeah.
I noticed people being very physically, um, like just seeing people holding hands, small things like that. like
Mhm.
couples, seeing couples on the street holding hands and things like that. It was a shock for me because I didn't grow up seeing people PDAing, saying public display of affections. So those were my first culture shocks, I would say, and the biggest one was English as well because Congo speaks French. So hearing English everywhere was definitely new as well. So
Indeed, indeed. So yeah,
yeah.
that's interesting that
Mm-hmm.
you don't see where you're from
Mm.
public displays of affection. And so the question now, not to get into your business, but
Yeah.
if you are with someone, do
Yeah.
you hold that tradition, or do have you adapted to
Hmm.
Australian and hold hands with your mate
I think
and,
I've
and things?
adapted. I think I've adapted to the smaller ones. I don't mind holding hands.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like Congo has changed a lot as well because of the whole globalization going on. Everybody's on
Uh-huh.
the internet, so they see and things like that. But I have some elements of me inside that are still holding to those. No, I don't want to be too, like touchy feely in the public. So I still have that, but I'm okay with the smaller ones. I can hold someone's hand in public. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny because it's like once you go up in Africa,
Mm,
up the Nile towards
mm,
Sudan, and I think even parts of Ghana, somebody told me they do this in Ghana,
mm.
holding hands is a sign of friendship. And you
Exactly.
even see that in the ancient Egyptian
Yeah.
wall murals and things. But
Mm,
even still, you would see even men. It
mm.
wouldn't have a sexual connotation. It would just
Yeah.
be that's a sign of friendship.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
But speaking on these cultural differences, what was it like? Your in terms of your fondest memories growing up where you grew up,
Mm,
and that you've learned to appreciate more being separated in a place like Australia, and
mm.
that is stayed with you even to this date.
I think I appreciated how close relationships were back at home because
Mhm.
there was no such thing as, oh, I have to call my aunt before I go to her house, or I
Mhm.
have to warn someone that, hey, I'm coming before I come there. It's like you just go to your auntie's place when you feel like it, like you don't have to call her up. You don't have to call your grandparents up before you turn up to their house. And I value that a lot. And I also got the opportunity to grow up closer to my grandparents,
Mhm.
especially on my mother's side. It was beautiful just being able to see them whenever you feel like it, um, going over there for a few days if you feel like it. So I appreciate the family or relationship dynamics of where I grew up, definitely, and I miss that.
I see.
Mm,
And if I remember correctly,
mm,
now of course for all of us over here in the
mm,
United States, everybody in
mm,
Africa, they're just black. But and we don't necessarily see the distinctions between saying
mm,
cultures. But if I understand correctly, your
mm.
mother and father are from two different ethnic groups.
Yes, yes, they
Yes,
are.
and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my mom is a Pende. Um,
Mhm.
Most of them are found in the Congo, like the Congo speaking part of Congo.
Mhm.
And my dad is a Luba. He's a Muluba from Kasai. So they come from two different places. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, people should be familiar with the Luba people, at least on this
Oh
channel.
yeah, 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 yeah. I noticed. Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, so my introduction to the Luba people comes from Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo,
Mm,
um, who's an Egyptologist and philosopher and theologian. He now lives in Belgium and
okay.
and teaches out there. And so, I do a lot of linguistic work in comparisons between Bantu speaking languages and cultures with that of ancient Egypt.
Mm,
And so when I first would do my comparisons, I would do Kikongo. And but when I came across Dr. Bilolo's work and I really started looking at ciLuba language,
mm,
it would I kind of discovered that it's a very conservative language, and it holds much of what we in linguistics call Proto-Bantu, the original community of
mm,
so-called Bantu languages,
mm,
and that has helped me to really get at the heart of a lot of ancient Egyptian concepts and words. And
mm,
so he's introduced me to some other Baluba people and
mm,
scholars, and I've
mm,
even published with him.
mm.
And so the rest
Wow.
is history. So I've been adopted somewhat as a pseudo Luba,
I
according to
see. Mm,
one brother. But uh, before I go there,
mm,
what inspired
mm,
the website and the YouTube channel, and why did you
mm,
feel the need to have to, well, not necessarily have to, but want to
mm, mm.
talk about and discuss Congo as a
Yeah,
whole, its
yeah.
history, languages, and things of that nature?
Mm. I think the desire for me to really speak of just Africa in general started when I first arrived in Solomon Islands. What I noticed is that when I told people that I was from Africa, they didn't care if I came from Congo or anywhere. They just were just almost immediately apologetic. Oh, I'm so sorry. You're coming from Africa, like I'm sorry. And I didn't understand it, in the beginning until I started being exposed to what they were exposed to. And I started seeing the images that I see and things like that. I was like, no, this is not everything. And so I started feeling that need to maybe represent Africa in a different way. So I would always take every opportunity that they gave me, whether it's like doing a presentation in school and things like that. I would always be so happy until I decided, why don't I just create a YouTube channel where I speak of Africa? I started it, but I noticed that it was just too big. Even me myself did not know so much about Africa as much as I thought I did. I've been in Congo, now I'm outside of Africa, and I don't know so much. And so I said, I think it was 2019, 2 years ago, I said, why don't I just learn about Congo? Because Congo is one of those places where nobody really knows it. It's like a mystery, every day you're just learning something new. And I thought, why don't I just speak about Congo? It's something that I've had an experience in. It's something that I want to know more about. And yeah, so I started Congo Talks, and I started learning more, started watching documentaries and things like. It's really funny because you don't really learn so much about the country even in Congo. You know, our education system is like they just teach you which European explorers came to Congo at what time, what did they discover, which discover. And now that I think about it, I'm like, what did they discover? People were always living there. They didn't discover anything. And so I started learning more about Congo. So I decided to start sharing. And funny enough, people found it useful. They started subscribing. I was like, oh, people actually want to know this. So I just continued. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
And what I appreciate about that story is that you saw a deficiency
Mm,
in the telling of the story of the narrative of
mm,
your people as a whole,
mm,
Africa as a whole, but your people in particular.
mm,
And instead of petitioning for someone else
mm,
to tell our story,
mhm,
you decided to not only create the channel, but to even go through
mm,
the process of learning the history and learning to edit videos and make these things so it's presentable to the public. and
mm,
and I think that's what we need more of, people having that love and interest
mm,
for the history and culture of Africa, and
mm,
and to be and for the indigenous to be able to tell their own story.
mm,
And so what is the process? What have you learned
mm,
as a result of going through that process and studying
mm,
the history that you did not know?
mm.
And what was the most surprising for you in terms of knowledge that you've gained so far?
I think the most surprising for me is just the fact that there are things that I know now that I think are basic knowledge that I feel like someone who has graduated from, just primary school should know. If you go to other countries like here in Australia, people learn history. And I was just surprised that me myself and most students back at home do know these things that I feel like are basic. But it also made me realize that somehow, because our education system was kind of built during colonization, I noticed how our history was almost suppressed, almost like it was being hidden, like they didn't want people to know. So back at home, when I reflect on how people live, they just live like nothing ever happened. And
Mm,
so even when we receive like foreigners or even people from Belgium, some of the countries that contributed to Congo's demise, they don't really have any connection to the pain or to the suffering that kind of unfolded during those years that Congo was kind of like under foreign control. And that was surprising for me. And another thing
mm,
is also that the more I learn, the more I realize that I don't know. So Congo becomes a little bit more complex the more I learn about it, if you will. I
mm.
don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Uh, Indeed, indeed.
Yeah.
And well, I should ask this. You
Mm,
know, uh, did you ever see yourself
mm,
being a type of historian and advocate for the culture? Like, did you did you go to university, and
mm.
was that part of your curriculum, or is this like it was just a totally different field? Like you went into medicine and then just decided one day I'm
No.
gonna start doing history.
No, one thing that's common between me and what I do on Congo Talks is just the fact that I love talking. I'm very opinionated, so I love getting my opinion out there. But what I studied, it's not what I'm studying right now. I'm doing my master's. I'm doing it in politics, so that is a
Okay,
little bit related to what Congo Talks is. But I did my bachelor's degree in business, so
okay,
it doesn't help me automatically to do Congo Talks, but it kind of like helps me express myself, I guess. So
yeah,
that's how I find it useful. But what I'm doing right now is what I feel like is kind of more related to Congo Talks. Although I wouldn't call what I do on Congo Talks as politics or activism or
yeah.
whatever. It's just free sharing of information. That's how I would like to think about it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say it's not related at all, because
Yeah.
like one of the things that I well, one, because not just Congo, but Africa in general
Mm,
is a growing economy
mm,
and marketplace.
mm,
And there's so many diverse groups and voices there. And the ability to understand the people and their history
mm,
will allow the person who wants to do business and set up business there, work more efficiently. And
Yeah.
so, as one of the things that we stress here, that
Mm,
economies aren't built on money
mm,
per se. They're
mm.
built on relationships. And so this is a deep Africana Studies channel, if you haven't
No.
gotten that clue. So,
Um,
we like to big up names like Shekanti Job, Dr. Till Falobinga,
mm,
and
mm,
Mbochi, uh,
mm,
Egyptologist, out of Congo as well.
mm.
Um, you know, the late Dr. Kimbandinde uh, Bonseki Fukiao. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. Um, yeah, you got to get all his books. Whatever
I
your
should.
budget is that you were going to go to the club with, sacrifice, get his books.
I'll start taking notes, so that
All
when
right.
I can get them all, I should just, I can just go
Especially,
and get
matter
them.
of fact,
Mm.
I will send you, he's a native Bakongo Kikongo speaker.
Oh,
And
okay.
um, I have some of his unpublished works, but I can't give those away for legal reasons. But I
Mm,
have his PhD dissertation. And
mm,
since you are doing your master's on politics and things, I'm not sure if you're
mm,
incorporating Congo history and culture into that, but just for the sake of having it, and to kind of read the perspective that
mm,
he brought in terms of some of the major issues that
mm,
Congo has had in terms of politics and education,
mm.
um, because of not adopting, not moving forward, grounded in their own cultures and languages.
Yeah.
And so I can definitely give you his PhD dissertation in a PDF. So I'll make sure I send that to you. But
Okay.
yeah, these uh, we that's one of the things that we try to do here. It's not just simply that we're providing some interesting information about Africa just to
Yeah.
to big ourselves up, but
Mm,
to show the history, show how we got to the place that we are at now, regardless if we're in
yeah.
the diaspora or on the continent,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also the rebuilding stages. And
Mm,
part of what we do here is try to build bridges and inform one another about each other in terms of
mm,
our histories and cultures, and so
mm,
that we can start building
mm.
friendships in all of these places, because one of the things ultimately we want to do, uh as pan-africanists, as we would call ourselves,
Mm.
is to build those relationships, to be able to build those economies and things. And so we're going to have to understand those politics,
Yeah.
those political issues, those histories and things. And so, um,
Mm,
even you may not think it's a big deal, and that some random brother
mm,
in the United States from
mm.
West Philadelphia, would find your channel and think anything of it. But this is exactly, the case. And so I want
Yeah.
to, say thank you for your channel and what you do. And I know you have another channel in which is more personable in some
Yeah.
areas.
Very
And
personal. I hide it.
uh, so, but you can
Yeah.
give that away, later on if you want to too. But
Yeah.
so now the question is,
Yeah.
where do you see you going with this? And what have your viewers
Mm.
demanded of you as a result of your channel?
Mm. I see that a lot of my viewers would love me to go a bit more spiritual. They want to know a
Hmm.
bit about the spiritual side of Congo, which is kind of difficult to do when you are not in Congo. Because even me as a Congolese, I didn't really, growing up there, I don't know much. And when you don't know so much about a subject, you don't know what's right and what's wrong. And
Hmm.
that's something that I plan on incorporating on Congo Talks when I can. But I really, what I would like to do is to really document the Congolese culture. If I told you that I know where I'm heading with Congo Talks, like exactly, I would be lying, because I'm doing everything kind of like with like every I take each day on its own basically. Um, but I would love to, if I can, to document some of the remaining Congolese cultures that I feel like are still kind of fading. Because I think one thing that really woke me up is recently I lost one of my grandparents,
Mhm.
and I was planning for a long time to go back home and just ask him some questions, just interview him, and about all these cultural practices that he know that he didn't probably share with us,
Mhm.
and things like that. So I feel like we're running out of time in that regard, and I would really love to just take Congo Talks to Congo and try to
Mhm.
document as much as I can. Yeah.
It's crazy that you said that, and this is one of the reasons that the author of this text, Dr. Chilemalema Mukinge,
Mm.
again of the Luba, one of the things that he wanted to do was to
Wow.
document. So he's an elder. So he's about the age of my grandfather. So I think he's like
Oh
79,
wow.
80, something like that. And so, he documents, I think it's too bright there, but
Mm.
I'll just do this. So he documents a lot of that, some of that that old wisdom and things
Mm.
that is fading. And that's why like someone like Dr. Fukiao is important, because he comes from an initiatic perspective, you
Oh
know,
wow.
and the initiatic system of Congo. Dr. Bilolo's more philosophy, than anything. And so I don't think he's necessarily written, because he mainly deal with Egyptology, but he always
Mm-hmm.
compares with Congo. And
Mm-hmm. Mm.
uh, but I think this text here is a crucial text to have, from one of those elders who's
Yeah.
also, educated enough um, to write,
Mm. Mm.
the deep aspects. And he also compares with, Congo culture with, uh, well, he well, they're all in the Congo. In
Mm.
terms of the Luba, he says Congo, Mongo people, Yansi, Bashi, Hema,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
Lindu,
Mm-hmm.
as well as ancient Egyptian Bambara in the west, and Fulani, Dogon, Bande, Yoruba, Igbos, Gikuyu, and the Amazulu in South Africa.
Mm.
And uh, so,
Sounds like
you
a
get,
really good source.
yeah. So, of
Yeah.
course, I recommend this every week to everybody
Mhm.
who's on the channel, but I'm really recommending it to you
No,
to
I would
check
actually
out
take it.
Dante.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The
but
funny thing
yeah,
is, I feel like you are more knowledgeable about, like literature from Congolese scholars than I am. So I feel like I'll make your channel my plug, if I wanna get something really good, deep,
oh, I told you it's all
understand.
things Congo here. Uh,
Congo
so,
mask. Yo, cool.
but yeah, but that's and it may be ancestral. So I've said this before
Mm,
that of course I was born here in the United States
mm,
in a city called Jacksonville, Florida.
okay.
And, you know, ever since I was young, I was into capoeira. And um,
What's
the
okay?
it's a Brazilian martial arts, but it comes from
Ah,
Congo.
mm,
And so, when we learn it's two major styles, the so-called Hajaner and the Angola, right? And so Angola's a little bit more slow, more ground fighting, things of that nature. So, they usually when you learn Angola style, usually the teachers will have more information about Congo and things like that. So, that's where you get introduced to individuals like Fukiao, who I mentioned
mm,
earlier. And so he died in 2013.
Oh.
I think next month, the end of next month, will be that the anniversary of his death. But he, you know, uh, informed us that is called Kapuru in Kikongo, and so just growing up doing capoeira just drew me to Congo culture and things, and so like I've just always been fascinated with,
Mm.
and I know this is a linguistic term, but like Bantu languages and culture,
Mm.
and so years later, when the technology allowed to be able to trace your DNA to a certain area, so it may not be such a big thing for, of course, Africans on the continent, but those Africans here in the United States and everywhere
Yeah,
who, because of
it's
history,
important for
have
you.
had
Yeah.
their history and their culture and everything taken from
Mm.
them. it,
Mm.
it it is a very big deal. So come to discover that my mother's her ancestral DNA traces to Mozambique, in
Oh,
terms of
wow.
the I think the Makwa. So a lot of people think that all the Africans that were taken to the United States came
I'm from
strictly from West
Nigeria.
Africa, if
Mm.
at most in Congo,
Mm.
Cameroon area, but they
Mm.
forget Mozambique and Madagascar. And
Mm.
so, and it was primarily of the Makwa people, but from doing a little history, ultimately they migrated from Congo, into that area as a result, I think, of the expansion of the Luba Empire.
Yeah.
And so this is why I say it's like it's ancestral. It's just, and so of course when I started
Really good knowledge. Mm-hmm.
studying ancient Egyptian language and culture, and I'm starting to see like, wait a minute, they do this here,
They
and
do
da,
that.
da, da, they
Exactly.
do that. I'm like, something's. Let me look into this a little deeper. So yeah, it's a little bit ancestral for me, but
Mm.
yeah, I recommend Dr. Mukinge, Fukiao, Bilolo, uh, and Sapo. They mainly write in French though. Fukiao writes, well, he wrote in English, but he has
Mm.
some text in French. It's hard to get. I haven't
Mm.
been able to get, but I know one of them is being translated by one of his former students who
Mm.
lives in Europe somewhere. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, it's that's but that's what you said is what I find is that I know more scholars from Congo than some people who are there. I'm like, how do you not know? I'm like, have you heard of da, da, da? They're like,
You're like, we
no,
don't
where is
know
he?
that.
I'm
It's
like,
it's
that's
it's
that's crazy.
funny. There's a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
It's like, but how do you not know you're from Congo? Just like, trust me, we don't know this stuff.
And people act like Congo is just a city, and like like it is not very big.
That's
You know,
yeah. That's yeah.
so here's the map of the
Mm.
Democratic Republic of Congo. You still
It's
got the
huge.
Republic of Congo,
Yeah, it's
and then you
huge.
got Angola over. It's like you know, all of this is. I mean, there's the we call Congo that we spell with a K, which is what
Mm.
we would include as Central African Republic, Republic of Congo, Angola, and the
Mm.
Democratic Republic of Congo and Gabon. And then,
Mm.
of course, you had the more political border of Democratic Republic of Congo. But yeah,
Mm.
this is a very big place. Uh,
It is very huge.
it's
Yeah.
not a city per se.
Yeah.
It's a so
It's funny because when you are in Congo, it's funny because when you are, for example, in the Western Congo, you
uh-huh,
don't know much about what's going on in the East. You know,
yeah.
it's really that big that you can really live in a bubble and
Uh,
have no idea what's going on in the North, in the South, in the center. So it's huge. Yeah.
let's see, and which is a shame,
Mm.
because I know that Sheikh Anta Diop, one of the things that if you're not familiar with this particular scholar,
Mm.
he wrote a text that was translated into English by the name of Black Africa. an economic and cultural basis for a federated state. So he's originally from Senegal. He's uh, a Wolof ethnic group and linguistic group,
Mm.
and he, you know, one of the pioneers in the cross study of Africa in terms of its cultures and its languages.
Wow.
And so, you know, he's made these arguments from the 1950s, uh, talking about the relationship between African people. And, you know, what he's able to see as an academic, the average person on the ground, you know, not in the ivory towers, is able to
Mm.
see. And
Mm.
so he was like, this is what makes it difficult to create a United States of Africa,
Mm.
because, you know, everyone's in their own bubble. And
Yeah.
there's, at least at the time, you know, in the
Yeah.
1950s and 60s, there's no
Mm.
inner African tourism where,
Mm.
you know, people are just, you know,
Oh, that
when
one
we
is
go here
hard.
vacation and
Yeah.
just, you know,
Yeah.
and know about each other. And,
Yeah.
you know, and if
It's
they
true.
would, they would see, be like, hey, wait a minute, this is,
This is very similar.
yeah.
Exactly. I think it's funny that you mentioned that because for me, I think being outside of Congo
Uh-huh.
has exposed me to other Africans as well.
Mm,
So it has exposed me. Like I visited Kenya, for example, South Africa, um, and I've just hung around different groups of Africans, and there are similarities,
mhm,
very striking similarities that you don't know about unless you are exposed to these different groups of people. And there's a lot that we have in common, but when you're just living in Congo, or you're just living in one side of Congo, you don't really get to experience other people. But also being outside of Congo has also exposed me to other Congolese people as well. You know,
mm,
those who come from the east, those who come from the center, the west, the wherever. And you just see that these are just one people, you know, they have different languages or maybe different cultural practices, but there are a lot of similarities, definitely. But that's something you don't get in Congo. First of all, we don't have enough infrastructures to even allow people to travel in Congo. So that's why you see people who are in the West would most likely just visit the main cities of the West. Those who
mm,
are in the East would most likely just visit the main cities of the East. So you don't really always have this provincial meetings or like connections all the time. But that's
mm,
something that I feel like could really help Congo because I think it helped being countries like Nigeria, for example, they have this NYSC that they send every high school student. They send them to different parts of Nigeria, basically. So if you finish here,
mhm,
you get sent to another province and you serve the country on that province. And I think that really helps them to maintain a sense of like togetherness. That's
mhm,
something that I feel like Congo could could copy if
mm.
they would like. But I think if I had the money to do it myself, I would actually sponsor that. I would literally like get students from this province, send them to that province. They spend a couple of months there, 6 months or something, bring them back, and it just build that trust. I think. Yeah.
Indeed.
Mm.
For those of y'all who are just joining us,
Mm.
we have Sister Felicity Kazadi. Am I saying it correctly?
You
Her
are
last
saying it so correctly that I'm
name.
surprised. I'm like, how do you know how to
Uh,
pronounce my last name?
all righty.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
from Congo, joining us live from Australia.
Mm.
And for those of you who haven't, I'm going to need y'all to just. That is right. I want y'all to hit the like button disrespectfully 2 or 3 times and subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed to the channel. We are trying to reach the 10,000 plus mark. And so we can be very disrespectful to the YouTube algorithm and get all of this good African knowledge out to the public. So we can only do
Indeed.
that with. So thank y'all again for joining us. And before we go, if you can teach us some phrases. So I've even though I look at Kikongo, it's mainly through a dictionary because I'm doing comparative work. So rarely do I
Yeah.
get to hear
Mm,
someone speak it. So if uh and I know you was allegedly getting some slack about the Kikongo at one point. So to help us get
mm,
back in alignment with hearing
mm,
our languages, our ancestral languages,
yeah.
can you teach us something
Mm,
in terms of some basics? Like, what would you start off with? What should we know,
mm,
with Kikongo, just starting
mm,
off?
yeah. Well, what I speak is one of the versions of Kikongo, so I can
All
teach you
right,
how to say some basic things like
all right.
my name is. You can say Zina Namono Kele da 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 da, and then you say your name. Like for me, I would say Zina Namono Kele Felicity or Felicite, like people in Congo say it.
Mm,
So Zina Namono Kele Felicite. You can also say welcome, like you're welcoming someone. You can say that Kukwisa Yambote. Kukwisa Yambote. Like if someone comes to your house
mm,
to visit, you can wish them a welcome. Kukwisa Yambote.
mm.
What other things that you can, if you want to ask what somebody else's name is, you can say Zina Nange Kele Nani.
So let's slow that part down. So
Okay.
what are, because you say it so fluently and fast that
Oh,
we'll
okay.
miss these words. So if you can give us each word,
Mm,
in that question that you just
okay.
asked,
Okay.
and so we can repeat.
Zina. Yeah,
Zena.
yeah, yeah. Zina
Hmm.
is name, basically. Zina na nge. So Zina na nge. So it's like the name of you. That's the literal translation, basically. Zina
Hmm.
na nge. Kele. Kele is. Nani is who, basically.
Hmm.
Zina na nge. Kele. Nani.
Zena Nange Kelly Nani.
Kele. Exactly. Oh my God.
Okay.
You're a fast learner. That's good.
Well, I know Zena is the same as let me see if I can write this out. In Egyptian
Mm. Okay.
is is given as the word name. So in
Mm.
Egyptian, it's just written as RN.
Mm.
And so,
Mm.
as I've discussed many times before, the
Mm.
R in ancient Egyptian is a rotarization of a Z sound. And so, one of the
Okay.
things that I always talk about is that Kikongo actually preserves much of the older pronunciation of words that you will
Mm.
also find in ancient Egyptian, which is
Mm.
interesting. And I think with you, um, well, there's several different ways because in Egyptian it's just K, but keep in mind they don't write their vowels in the ancient Egyptian language,
Okay.
so you only get the consonantal skeletons. Um,
Mm.
and what was uh Kelly again?
Kele is.
Is, let me
Mm.
see. Well, they would write is differently. Um,
Mm.
what's funny though is not, that's not what I want to. They would write, is are this way. Oops. And let me add that. So in Egyptian, it would be, well, this is one of the words that you can use. But what's interesting is that, as I've shown before, the K sound is what becomes the what we transliterate as the J or the Y sound.
Okay.
And so
Mm.
there is artists. It technically starts with the same phoneme. It's just a sound change happening in Egyptian. So as I said,
Yeah.
Kikongo preserves the older pronunciations than the
Okay.
ancient Egyptian.
But
And
all versions of Kikongo, because
yeah,
there's one as well that is spoken in another part of Congo that is a bit closer to the one that's spoken in Angola. What I
mm,
speak is a more or less like a broken down, I think they call it.
yeah.
But there's another version as well of Kikongo that other people speak as
I
well.
wonder
So
what's the one that Fukiao spoke.
like
And
in the other Kikongo, they would probably say they wouldn't say Zina, they would probably say Nkumbwami or Kumbwami, like NK U, so Kumbu instead of like Zina.
let's see.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
In of course ciLuba, it's
Mm.
Gina. Um and with the G being a prefix, Ina, which is also funny because in the isiZulu language,
Mm.
they have another word for name, but the
Okay.
word for name
Mm.
became a, how should I explain this? All right, so even in ancient Egypt, there's component parts of the body or the self that
Mm.
is, kind of like a spiritual double or something like that, that hangs around it. So your name is part of your spiritual component, the Ren, or the
Okay.
Zena. So
Wow.
that's a whole
Mm.
spiritual component. And
Mm.
so it exists still in among the Amazulu. They call it Ina. And
You know.
so like in how should I say this? Let me do this. In ciLuba, um, it's really written this way, right? For name, because the G is a prefix.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
the
Mm.
historical is supposed to be written like this, or
Gina.
right? Because they lost
Mm.
the R or L or the well, Proto Bantu is D, but some pronounce it R and some mainly L. But they lost
Mm.
this sound, so and it's regular with other words that we can compare. So this is how you know that they're connected in terms of the Amazulu and the Luba, because they
Yeah.
lost this, but the Zulus kept the Ina, and they
Mm.
replaced the word for name, but they still kept the concept that it's your spiritual double,
Yeah.
or whatnot.
Yeah.
And so I always find that interesting, and
Mm.
that so this I think this is something that may have been lost among
Yeah.
the
And I think
Baluba
it's
people.
interesting. Yeah.
Go
I
ahead.
think it's interesting that you've mentioned that as well because there is this tendency, like Congolese people don't just name their children, they have to attach some meaning um, in the names. So the first names are usually in French, but even those, they tend to adapt them to certain meanings, but especially the middle and last names um,
Mm,
are very meaningful. They have to mean something to
mm.
to the parents before they give it to their children. So I think that it's interesting that you mentioned that about names having meanings and things
He
like
talks
that.
about that in here.
Oh, okay,
And one
cool.
thing that I'm investigating is uh, another Luba speaker, native Luba
Mm,
speaker, talks about, and I don't know, isn't it as prominent as it was historically, but to have kings and how the kings would have five names, right?
mm,
And it's interesting that um, the kings in ancient Egypt, also would have 5 major names, and you would see it on their titular, and the uh, the the names will be written in what we call a shinu.
Mm.
But as I've discussed before, that is just a what we call a paronym or a rebus for the word for name. It's just a word for name. So you see how you have Jinnah,
Mm.
we would have Shin. It's
Mm.
just a dialectical variation of the same thing, but
Mm.
they would have 5 of them in there, and so I'm still investigating the nature of the 5 names that these Luba kings would have, and what each one of them meant, and to see if
Yeah.
there's any kind of parallels, and see if they can help us answer anything with ancient Egypt. But that's an
Maybe.
ongoing
Yeah.
random note
But
project.
I mean, it's not boring. I just don't know much
Really.
about it, so I'm really just
No,
noting because like
I
this
know
is good knowledge. It's
you're
new.
young. I'm in my 40s, so I've been at this for a while. So
I
yeah,
see.
I wouldn't expect you. And
Mm.
of course, I don't know as much as Dr. Mukinge, who grew up there, and
Mm.
of course is in his 80s.
Yeah.
So, um, but
Mm.
uh, let me see if there's any questions. Um, Let me see. If y'all have a question, I'll take maybe 1 or 2 questions from those of you who are in the chat. So it's going to be a slight delay before they do it. So, but before we go,
Mm.
again, tell them where they can uh, see your work,
Mm.
and the website, any kind of communications that you would want to interact with the people.
Yeah. So what I do is basically mainly on YouTube. So you can find me on Congo Talks 243. And by the way, I wanted to mention what 243 means. It's just an
Okay.
area code for the DRC.
All right.
There's no much to it. So Congo Talks 243, and I'm also on Instagram as Congo Talks 243. My website is still kind of running at the moment. They're still working on it, so it's live, but it's not so good yet. So I will probably announce what's happening on that in the upcoming days or months. But yeah,
Indeed, indeed.
yeah.
And her the link to her website and things is in the description. And it's interesting because African Americans, we put our area code, phone number, area code, and identify each other. So of course, if you from New Orleans, you're from the 504. If you from H Town, it's a 713-218. You from Philly, the 2 roll. So that's interesting. But oh, let me get rid of that banner. There we go. And Sister Naja Phillips has a question. She asks, have you heard stories of history from your grandparents or older relatives? So even though you didn't get to
Story.
record it, but as growing up or earlier, have you
Mm.
heard any of that history from your older grandparents?
Not much really. What I remember from my grandparents is the fact that they are very spiritual, but nothing out of the ordinary. No, there was nothing. They would say things like, "Oh, I used to work with Europeans back in the days and things like that," but there wouldn't be so much context in it. They would just tell it as a story, but they don't tell you more. So people don't remember much really, and maybe because we never really asked them about their own history, we just saw them as grandparents, and when you're a kid, you just feel like they've been old their whole life. So you don't really think that they have parents as well. They have a family in the history. So we never really asked. So yeah,
I see, I see.
yeah.
And I guess this is a question for me. Do Native African scholars know about African influence in ancient America, as people mentioned by Professor Ibrahim Sertima, like, for instance, the Davenport Stela are written in 3 African languages side by side? I'm not sure. I know Sheikh Anta Diop was familiar with Ivan Van Sertima because they communicated with each other. And but to the extent that other African scholars know of them, I'm not sure. And so I can't answer that, especially with the stela. And so I'm not familiar with the stela, so I have no commentary to say on that in particular. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Just some comments. They a few people have already subscribed to your channel. It looks like they appreciate the information that you dropped, and
Thank you, guys.
so they love you over here on the Mbongi. So
Thank you.
I
I
just want
love
to
you guys
say
too.
respect. Um, I just want to say thank you for spending your Friday morning slash afternoon
Mm,
beginnings with us here and sharing a little bit about your story.
no worries.
Really want to let people know about your channel and what you got going on. And so I appreciate what you do. And again,
Mm.
appreciate you for coming here and talking with our folks.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel supported and seen, and I'm definitely going to be on your channel now that I know that you have all those goods. I'll just be there, be like, who's that scholar? But yeah, I'll be there. But
Indeed,
yeah,
indeed.
thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Mm.
And before we go, community, make sure that you join the Patreon page and subscribe and help us out there. We are doing a documentary film, Chiana Into, that is the Into family, and we're going to show the relationship between the ancient Egyptian civilizations and Meroitic, and that with Central Africa, Congo, and Bantu cultures in general. So we, start shooting when we go to Egypt in February, which y'all can join the trip and check us out and join the conference and see all these wonderful scholars as we do the damn thing as we say. And as always, go to the maduandelapress.com, or you can go to amazon.com and purchase the text Muntu wa Zombie, Portrait of Human as God's Special Creation. And a quick announcement, as I've been making announcements. My latest text, ciLuba, Maweeja, Yoruba, Orisha, and Ancient Egyptian Ak, an exploratory etymological study. The first text under the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. The release date has been set and it's going to be for Saturday, November the 6th. So, those of you in the United States can pre order the text um, at maduandelapress.com, which its link is in the description as well. And it's about 20 bucks. It's about 110 pages, roughly 7 by 10 size. And so I show the relationship between the name or a name for divinity, Maweeja, and among the ciLuba speakers, as well as the etymology of Orisha, and in the Yoruba language, and the ancient Egyptian Ak, which we totally mispronounce. But of course, they didn't write out their vowels, so there's some leeway there. But just to let you know that all three of them are the same word, just dialectical variations of them. And I do a whole breakdown of Osiris and Amen in African languages. It is definitely a text to get. So you can pre order your text now at maduandela.com. And the official release is November the 6th. And I chose that date because that's when I'll be going to Houston, Texas, and we'll be showing the Hoppy film. And Professor Dr. Wade Nobles will be there. This is him in the corner. and of course, Brother Taki and Sister Felicia, the producers of the documentary film Hoppy. So make sure that y'all are in the place to be if you are in Houston that weekend, and we will set it off proper like. So, with that said, and all my ranting done for the evening, y'all have a blessed night and day wherever you are in the world. Um, and see you next time. Peace.